guys, I wanted to thank you so much for the support on my first video. It really means a lot, and it kind of definitely motivates me to make more. What we're looking at right here is an air layer off of a pomegranate tree uh, that I actually took last year. I'm thinking of working it and trying to get rid of this mess of roots that's in this pot. It grew so many roots in just about a month's time. I separated the layer and put it into this pot about a month before it got cool. And I will show you in another video uh, just how many roots are in this tree or in this pot. It's pretty crazy, but I think it'll be interesting. Today, however, I have another tree to show you that is just a little bit bigger. Okay, so this tree is a Trident Maple. I bought it last year from a grower in Florida. It is gigantic. It weighs about, I don't know, 100, 150 pounds. I'm not sure. But what we've got here, if you can't tell, we've got several limbs that died back and they really need to be removed. So today I'm going to show you a couple of these and how we are going to remove them, and we're going to work on the cambium to try and get it to roll over and callus. So on this first limb, it's the lowest limb on the tree. I never budded out this year. As you can see, I did try to approach graft it, but the limb was already dead. I didn't know that at the time, so it obviously didn't take. There's dieback under the branch as well, the black area here. It's probably got some dieback to the left as well. I'm going to remove this branch and get rid of all this dead softwood and work on the cambium. Like I said, just lightly scrape it. That will stimulate the callus to actually roll over. And I will actually probably be putting this tree into the ground for a year or two to help extra growth. Will help that callus roll over faster. You can see there are several spots all over this tree that have dieback like this. The biggest one is the one on the front. However, there are a couple others up higher in the tree that I will address. Maybe not in this video, maybe sometime in the future. Okay, first things first, I do not actually have any kind of fancy power tools to use on this. I do have a Dremel, which I'm going to use extensively, but here I'm just going to use the same handsaw that I've been using. I'm going to err on the side of caution here, and I'm not going to go right up against the trunk in case there is a little bit of live wood here. That way, if there is, dieback, it will be fine. If it's alive, maybe a callus adds a little bit of interest lower in the trunk since I don't have any branches low down right here. So all I'm going to do is make a cut here, and then we will clean it up with the Dremel and a grafting knife if we need to. There are going to be a lot of sharp instruments and power tools used in this video. So any children that may be watching this, make sure you have your adult supervision before you go using anything like this. We wouldn't want you to lose a finger or anything like that. One thing that I should mention is I am located in the southern US, so my spring comes pretty early. I probably wouldn't be doing the work that I've been doing on these trees if my spring wasn't coming in the next month or so. So that's something to keep in mind. If you do live in the northern US, your winter's going to last until April or May, from what I understand. So you're in a little different situation. But for those of you that live in the south, southeast, I'm in zone, I believe 8B, if you know your agricultural zone. I'm pretty good as far as working this early in the year. So I've removed the branch here, and as you can see, there's a little bit of live wood on the left here. I'm not really sure what this green area is, to be honest with you. To the right of it's dead. That may have been some sort of bacterial infection. That may be why this whole branch died back. It's a possibility. So we're going to start with this bit on the Dremel. It is a larger wood removal bit, just for quicker, larger amounts of wood removal. And what we're going to do is first remove the dead wood from this branch, and then we'll work our way down. I'm not really worried about being too precise or anything at this point because a lot of this will be cleaned up when I'm getting closer to being done. Right now I'm just trying to remove most of this wood that I know to be dead, and I want to really get down just to the live wood. Once I see a little bit of live wood, that's where I'm going to stop. And for any of you guys that are not experienced with this, and I'm by no means an expert, but the whole process that we're doing here is to help the callus roll over cleanly. Whenever you have a cut, whenever you have a wound on a tree, they will heal as the tree grows. It will tend to callus over that wound unless it is too deep, in which case there are a few things you can do to remedy that, but I will show you that maybe in the future when I come upon it. But when you have a wound like this that is a fairly shallow wound, it is pretty large, but it's fairly shallow. Um, the tree will grow over this, provided that the area there is pretty flat, and it also does not heal as well if the wood in the wound itself is dead or soft. So by removing this dead wood and getting down to the live wood, we will greatly increase the rate at which this callus forms, and hopefully, our goal would be to seal over this entire wound. Now that would take probably 2 or 3 years if I put it in the ground and just let it grow freely, which I may do because if you can tell, the branching up top is not in proportion with the rest of the tree. It needs to thicken a lot. So I may very well just put this in the ground for the next year, maybe two, and see what it looks like after that. Now I've removed a large chunk of this wood from the top, and our next step, I guess, I'm doing this a little out of order, but we're going to use this very tiny bit. I can't quite get it to focus, but it's a little circular ball bit, and it's used for a little more precise removal. And I'm just going to use it to clean up the darkened area of the wood here. That's old, basically rotted wood. It's not very thick. It's probably a millimeter or two thick, but I'm going to use it to get rid of that. And I can also get closer to the edges of the callus here without wounding them. The larger bits, running the Dremel at higher speeds tend to put you a little more risk for slipping and messing up the callus, which we're trying to heal the tree, not hurt it as much as we can here. So I'm just going to use this to go around these edges and just remove about a millimeter of wood um, around this whole wound. A little bit about this tree. Like I mentioned before, I did buy it from a grower in Florida, and he has a pretty big nursery. I've never actually been there, but I'm in contact with him pretty frequently. I've bought a couple of trees from him. This is probably the largest. Um, this tree, like I said, it does have its challenges, but that's part of bonsai is, looking at these challenges and improvising as best you can to make the tree your own. Everything's going to have its own little flaws, but that, I like to think that that gives a tree character. What we're doing today, maybe in 3 or 4 years, this is healed over and it looks nice and clean. Maybe it does not heal over and this becomes a hollow. Uh, that is not traditionally what you want for a deciduous tree. Uh, they're supposed to be as close to without imperfection as you can come. So hollows and gins like you get on pines or junipers are not really the traditional way to go with deciduous trees. But again, this is I guess we're doing American bonsai, and while we do want to adhere to the traditional ways as much as we can, we still have to adjust and do what we can with each individual tree. Otherwise we'd be throwing this tree away just because it has this flaw. It has these diebacks. One thing this tree will be a candidate for in the future. It has a few uh, challenges, I guess. For example, here we don't have a branch low down. That makes it a great candidate for a graft, be it an approach graft or a thread graft. I will definitely be doing several videos on both grafts here in the spring. I have several trees that need improvement to their navari, and I will do that by grafting on several small seedlings, probably via the approach graft, excuse me, via thread graft. It seems to be almost foolproof. If I can find a drill bit long enough, I will do that with this tree as well. Of course, this is, about a 4-inch diameter trunk where you can see right here, so I do have to find a pretty long drill bit. Um, as far as an approach graft growth goes, it is a little bit easier to place. However, um, the the angle at which the branch is going to come off of the tree is usually not quite as natural as with a thread graft. Thread grafts themselves have to be done before bud break because the process of thread grafting a seedling through a tree to make a branch or for roots, it has to be a hole has to be drilled through the tree, the parent tree, and the seedling has to be threaded through it, hence the name thread graft. And if the seedling has already budded out, you'll be rowing those buds off, and it probably will not take. So the advantage to an approach graft is that it can be done any time of year. However, again, like I said, the overall look tends to not be quite as natural or feel quite as natural as a thread graft. This tree will also need probably a fair amount of root work. When I bought this tree this spring, I threw it into this, I think this may be a cat litter box. I'm not really sure. It was the only thing that I could find at the box store that would fit the tree. Um, I believe it was April when I got the tree. I didn't want to work the roots. In hindsight, I probably could have, but I did not. And so I placed it in this big container with 100% turfus. Uh, the red soil you can see in the bottom left of the screen. That is just an additive usually used on sports fields, baseball fields, things like that. It's like a poor man's akadama if you cannot find it. However, the particle size tends to be a pretty good bit smaller than that of sifted akadama. It's probably no more than 2 millimeters at its largest. This tree probably needs a much larger particle size than that. Um, this is what I had at the time, so this is what I gave it. Uh, it is going into a pot, and one of the several things we look at when we're putting a tree into a pot is water retention. We look at nutrition. We look at particle size. We do not want a bunch of different particle sizes because if you have several large particle sizes coupled with several small particle sizes, they will tend to compact and drainage will be affected. Uh, and what that will mean for your tree is over time the roots will become too wet. They won't be able to get oxygen and they may die. You may get root rot, and that will make your tree, you'll notice the vitality just slowly decrease. Your leaves may yellow, things like that. So what we're looking at here, turfus is a decent substitute for akadama in a pinch because it does hold water, it does release that water, and it does drain fairly well. The challenge that you get with this, though, is again it's a small particle size, so you really need to match your other components with this the same particle size. And you know, in general, for a larger tree, you would want a larger particle size. So really, this tree with this tiny, tiny turfus is not ideal. The growth this year was not amazing, as you would expect, but I will put it back into the ground. My garden soil is usually a mix of this turfus of regular garden soil and some manure or something like that as a fertilizer. I do fertilize it pretty often during the year as well. But that tends to keep my trees in the ground pretty happy and they tend to grow pretty well. So that's probably where this is going. Were I to put this into a pot, I do have a pot purchased for it, but I don't think it's time yet. I would probably use a mixture of Akadama, pumice, lava rock, and a little bit of cedar bark for water retention as an organic additive as well. So now we've done most of our wood removal. I'm just going to clean up the edge of this where we do have a little bit of live wood. Like I mentioned earlier, you really want a smooth area um, for the tree to callus. It likes it a whole lot better than a rough, uneven surface. So I'm going to clean this little spot here that I noticed with my grafting knife. And then I'm actually going to use a little wire brush tool to both kind of sand the rest of this area as well as score the cambium just a little bit. So this is the wire brush tool I was talking about. You can actually kind of turn it if you have an adjustable Dremel, turn the speed down just a little bit. This is usually probably used to polish metal, would be my guess, but it works pretty well here just to kind of smooth out these little irregularities that from the little ball bit. So I'm just going to use it to kind of go over everything here. I apologize for the camera angle. I was trying not to have the rotating mass of the Dremel hit the edge of the bark. I had that happen a couple of times, nicked it a little bit, and we want to avoid that as much as we can. So I was trying to just get this in the best angle as I could. But I'm just going to go over the entire area, just kind of smooth it out just a little, and then we'll use this to go over and score the cambium just a tiny bit. By wounding the bark here just a tiny bit, just enough until you see the green, um, this usually prompts the tree to heal that wound. And a lot of times you can use this process or this method to restart a wound healing. For example, this callus here is probably slowed in the last few years and may have stopped altogether. But by wounding the edge here just a little bit, the tree realizes it needs to heal this area, and that will a lot of times restart the callus growth. So that's just one important thing to do. You could probably do this yearly if you have a big scar that you're trying to heal. You would cover it with some sort of putty, but every year or whenever you check the progress of it, if it looks like it may have stalled, you can use a wire brush like this. You can use a knife and just be careful. You could probably use sandpaper or steel wool or anything like that. Just anything that is slightly abrasive that can remove just a little bit of the top layer of the bark. So now that we have the wound cleaned as best we can, we're going to use this putty. You could use the same liquid type wound sealant that I used in my last video. I opted for this. The thing about this stuff, as you can tell, it doesn't stick very well. It kind of sticks to your hands. It doesn't want to come off. So the best thing we want to do is first off make sure there's no dust in this wound because that will keep the putty from sticking like it should. Um, any kind of brush will work here. Obviously, I used an old toothbrush, but The trick to using this kind of putty is to make sure you keep your fingers wet. It does not adhere to a wet surface very well. So I just lick my fingers and it keeps it from sticking to your hands, and you'll be able to tell when you need to lick your fingers again because the putty will stop sticking to the tree and it will start sticking to your fingers. What we're going to do is go all over this wound, and we're going to make sure that we cover the most important would be the cambium that we just wounded. We want to protect that from any kind of pathogens getting in there. We also want to be able to maintain moisture inside this area. We don't want it to get dried out. We're going to go ahead and cover the entire area all the way around, and then we will just let it sit. One good thing about this kind of putty as opposed to the liquid, um, whenever the callus is healing, you'll actually be able to tell without removing this putty because it will kind of crack at the edges or roll up a little bit as the callus grows the wound is healing. This putty will kind of get pushed out of the way, and it will you'll be able to kind of tell because, like I said, it will crack or kind of roll inwards as the wound heals. So that's one easy way to do it without having to remove this putty every year to check. Um, Again, if you are healing a larger wound, you may need to do that. You could remove just the outer layer and have just enough to to see the cambium, see if you need to rewound it. But with the liquid, it does tend to dry in a kind of opaque manner, but it's really not. It's not my favorite for larger wounds. It just doesn't look quite as good. Not that this looks great, but this does not really stick out a whole lot, and that the liquid kind of tends to look like you put rubber cement on your tree or something like that. It just doesn't quite look the same to me. Of course, that's just personal preference, but uh, again, for this bigger wound, I'm going to go with this kind of putty sealant. So here's the finished product. We're going to let this grow for a year or two. We'll keep an eye on this callus, but hopefully it heals and this wound completely closes. Thank you guys for watching.